Angel Down by Daniel Kraus won the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction in 2026. So what is it about this novel that surprised me so much? Let me explain. Hi, I'm Amanda, and this is Spineless Books, your one-stop spoiler-free shop for all things audiobook. I have read a lot of Pulitzer Prize winners and finalists. Audition, James, Headshot, Demon Copperhead, The Great Believers, There There, Imagine Me Gone, All the Light We Cannot See, Visit from the Goon Squad, The Road, just to name a few. And I feel like, for me, these books fall into two main categories, one of which is a long, winding narrative about American life, something that talks about a condition that either has happened or could happen or maybe just a story about a place and time. So for example, The Great Believers would fall into this category. Demon Copperhead would fall into this category. I would even say, although it's speculative, The Road would fall into this category. And then I find that there are the novels that really break with traditional structure. Headshot is one of those. Trust is one of those. Imagine Me Gone is one of those. You're listening to things that are unusual perspectives, but really play with narrative in a new and unique way. When I read Audition, for example, I feel like I'm still confused as to what was going on, and that was one of the finalists for this year. So where does Daniel Kraus's Angel Down come into play? For me, this one's kind of a genre bender as far as Pulitzer Prize is concerned. It's a fantasy story, sort of, set in a historical fiction period, World War I. So it's really a very unusual take. The only other book in that list that I would say is as unusual is There There, because I think that plays with structure but also tends to a portrait of American life. I didn't really feel like Angel Down did that. I felt like it was a fantasy story set in World War I rather than a story about war, which was a little peculiar. As a listener, I might have missed the fact that this is written in a very unusual way. There's essentially no punctuation other than commas in this book. I had to look at an excerpt from the text to know that, but there was something about the way the audiobook was read that made me think something was up, and that's why I looked into it to begin with. But there are basically just paragraph breaks, and they're not even necessarily at the breaks in the paragraph. This is one long, rambling narrative, and somehow it works. It feels a little like an inner monologue, but when you listen to the audiobook, it's not as noticeable, because here's the thing. We're used to listening to people speak at length without proper grammar. That's just sort of how we talk. But we're not used to that in writing, so I would imagine the audio experience sort of camouflaged what Daniel Kraus was doing as far as actual writing is concerned. The idea that an angel would land on a battlefield in World War I is obviously a bit far-fetched, but this book isn't really about the angel and what happens when the angel gets there, so much as it is about the humans who are around the angel and what happens to them. The book is centered around a group of 5 soldiers, primarily one, however. Young Private Cyril Bagger is our main character. He is the perspective that we get the most of in this story. And then second to Bagger is a young soldier named Arno, who's way too young to be at war, but he lied about his age in order to have somewhere to go, because he's basically an orphan. So you've got Bagger and you've got Arno, and then you have the other 3 men in their little brigade, and they are the 5 that stumble upon this angel in the field. Bagger is young, and he's trying to hold on to a conscience in a setting that typically asks you to put that conscience aside in order to survive. There are ways in which this works to Bagger's advantage, and there are ways in which it doesn't, but the primary way that it impacts him is his willingness to take Arno under his wing and care for the much younger soldier and really look out for him. If you asked my opinion on war novels, I would say in general it's a no thank you. They're not books that I seek out, they're not books that I read very often, but this book seemed like an exception to that rule. I think if you're someone who doesn't really enjoy war novels, you might like this one. The true crux of the story, in my opinion, is really more about morality and ethics. And in this book, there is a huge spectrum between totally unethical and really selfless, and all of the 5 men fall somewhere on that spectrum. The way in which their choices play out really becomes the conflict in the story, and obviously the stakes are high when an angel lands in their midst. These men are in a desperate situation, and the book is asking big questions about where different paths like greed and self-centeredness lead. I found the writing to be stylistically unique. The text was very emphatic, but it was also very simple, and then occasionally there'd be a super poignant, really hefty vocabulary word thrown in. And I found that what those words serve to do is just sort of snap you out of being in a rut of listening or reading. Like there would be passages that were long description, and then all of a sudden it would like wake you up a little bit. Not that you were drifting in attention, but it just made sure you were still there. The other thing Krause did in his writing that really struck me as unique is he often used the tactic of listing. So for example, when talking about who is impacted by the war, he would list all of the different countrymen from the many, many countries. I'm talking like maybe as many as 30 or 40. And sitting in that listening mode of the list really forced you to be impacted by that section. Now, obviously, as a reader, it would be easy to glance over it, but when you're listening, you had to hear every one of those names. And it made you sort of settle down and realize this is important and I have to pay attention to this part. The Pulitzer Prize often asks that things demonstrate an aspect of American life, though it's not a requirement for the winner. And I think the World War I portions of this book definitely do that. But the angel and the fantasy component of this book really doesn't, so I'm very surprised by this choice in that regard. The soldiers have contrasting desires for survival, camaraderie, and integrity, and when the angel lands amongst them, everything goes haywire. I need to take a moment to talk about the incredible narration of Kirby Hayborn. I think this might be one of the best character-to-narrator matches I've heard all year. Kirby Hayborn sounds young. He's believable as a 19-year-old, a 20-year-old in his voice, but he also narrated with such a propulsiveness that really respected the style of text that Krause put on the page. Without having seen the text, I understood that something different was going on grammatically, and it wasn't until I looked it up that I realized exactly what was happening, but boy did it match. Hayborn nailed it. He also has a really unique ability to represent yelling without yelling, if that makes sense. Like the audio recording didn't get any louder, but you knew that he was yelling in the scene, and I think about the vocal control that he had to have in order to pull that off. And I'm just super impressed. In fact, I immediately looked for other books narrated by him because he's someone that stood out to me as an incredible narrator. I was even more impressed when I again looked at the text and saw the style in which it was written, because I think Hayborn absolutely matched it to a T. So why was this book a surprise to me? I mean, it kind of sounds like I really enjoyed it, and I've enjoyed a lot of the Pulitzer Prize winners and finalists. Here's the thing about this one that was a little bit different. I was eager to read it. I got through it really quickly. I found myself very much paying attention and interested in the story as I listened. But around the 3/4 mark, I really wasn't sure if I liked the book or not. Like, I wanted to read it, I wanted to know what was happening, but I just couldn't put my finger on what it was that made me unclear. But somehow in that last 25% of the book, Krause got me in a stranglehold and really held on tight. I found the book's final message really moving and really impressive, and it solidified everything to me. So funny that I was 3/4 of the way through saying, I'm not sure how I feel about this, and then all of a sudden I was like, this was a 5-star read. I'm a little bit aware of Stag Dance, which was one of the other finalists, and I have read Audition, which was the second finalist, but I have to say, having the awareness that I do about those, I'm really impressed with Angel Down. I think it was a wise choice, and I very much enjoyed it. If you love war novels, you have to check this one out. And if you don't, but you're curious, I think this one might slip under the radar as far as things that are a little bit out of your comfort zone. It's a simple story. It's told simply. I definitely recommend the audiobook. So let me know if you've read it, or if you haven't, if you're going to pick it up. But remember, you might love what I hate and hate what I love. So make your own opinion, but thanks for listening to mine. See you next time.